Early this morning, Minnesota legislators concluded their 2015 session. I thank them for passing the remaining budget bills, as well as the legacy and bonding bills, all of which I will sign into law after this dedication ceremony. Last fall, Minnesota voters chose divided political leadership for our state. This legislative session ended in that same way, with legislators sharply divided over key issues like the optimal amounts of taxes and expenditures, social services, and transportation improvements. Nevertheless, legislators achieved significant progress in providing better care and education for our youngest and most vulnerable citizens, children who were previously considered too young for structured elementary education. Minnesotans at the other end of life will also benefit from increased funding for nursing homes, personal care attendants, and other supportive services. As I have noted before, a sign of true compromise is that no one is happy with it. Many compromises had to be made during this legislative session, and many people across the political spectrum believe it suffered from too many missed opportunities. One positive result, however, is that the remaining surplus, combined with the budgeted reserve and cash flow account, has left the state with a positive balance of almost $2.5 billion. It stands in welcome contrast to the financial uncertainties of recent years. Legislators from both political parties have devoted countless hours to leading our state toward a better future. They and their supportive families have earned our gratitude. I'd be glad to respond to questions. Well, I don't know what was said. I don't know the context of what was said. I have not made any promises to anybody to secure the passages of these bills. I think it's widely assumed that there's going to be a tax bill next year. Those said over and over were the two reasons to leave $1 billion on the bottom line, which has been growing with every new revenue forecast, is to provide a tax bill as well as a transportation bill. So it doesn't surprise me, but again, I don't know any of the details.
Governor, the Republicans yesterday, the leaders in particular, were saying that these bills are not much different than the ones that passed at the end or were negotiated at the end of the regular session. Are these better bills coming out than when the end?
Yes, they are, and we have documentation of that, which I think you have before you. I mean, the education bill is $125 million more for children throughout the state. One of the things that bothered me during the negotiations that I was trying to get another $25 million of additional spending for education was the Republican reaction in our meetings again and again. Well, what do we get for it? Well, what you get for it is the chance to spend $25 million more to improve the education for young people. But that was. By my measure, the $125 million more was a very important reason why I vetoed the bill in the first place and why it was worth going through that additional effort. The environment bill is, it was a terrible bill when it passed both the House and Senate, the conference report, and we were able to make it better in significant respects, changing some of the timelines, giving greater flexibility to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which allows them to continue to do the work that they do to protect the environment. The buffer bill, the avian influenza funding are important accomplishments, and the jobs bill again left much to be desired. And there were features in both bills that primarily came from the House Republican caucuses, and which I wish I'd been able to remove and was not able to. But they made them as bad as they could in the beginning, and they kept it bad throughout.
On the environment bill, there's a large number of Democrats in the House and Senate who think it is still a terrible bill, and that this is setting the state backwards, moving backwards from environmental regulation.
Well, I'm certainly don't quarrel with that assessment. In terms of the bill, I think the bill was a terrible bill. It shouldn't have come to me in the way it was, but it did, and my staff and Lieutenant Governor and I worked very, very hard to improve it, and it's still a bad bill. But it's not going to set the environmental progress back in Minnesota because I won't let it. And I will make sure that the Pollution Control Agency and the DNR and other state agencies and initiatives continue to move forward. There won't be a citizens board, which I regret. I think it's just very indicative of the attitude of the Republican caucus in the House to try to roll back these initiatives. But there's only been, to my knowledge, one disagreement between the Citizens Board and my administration on a matter of policy or program. So we're closely aligned with the board, and we'll continue to make those improvements, and we'll continue to stand up for the people of Minnesota and safe water and air and natural resources with or without a Citizens Board, and we'll have a chance to come back in 2017, I hope, to restore it, and I'll work very hard to do so.
Governor, are you saying that blame falls on your shoulders, that there's now not a Citizens Board?
No, blame falls on the Republican caucus in the House. They're the ones who took it out, and they're the ones who strenuously opposed putting it back in. You know, they're like they had their trophies. You know, the state auditor was treated with profound disrespect. Elected constitutional officer, elected 3 times over their Republican candidate for state auditor, had earned the right to run that office the way it had been heretofore. That was a trophy. The Citizens Board was a trophy. They were more about the symbolism to their caucuses and their constituents about what they could do to desecrate and demolish government in Minnesota, which is their ultimate aim.
Will you sign these bills after you
Yes, I'll sign them. Yes, I'm relieved that we're done. Session's over. I'm relieved that state employees don't have to worry any longer about their jobs come July 1st. And you know, there are good features in these bills which need to be put to work for the benefit of Minnesota.
Governor, last night Republicans cracked foul when it seemingly looked like Senator Peter Bosch had been ranked on the agreement. He said last night in defending that move that late date thing that the agreement was signed, that your staff had drafted up a different version that said that leadership would not support amendments, or I guess what I'm trying to ask is whether you feel he went back on the spirit of the agreement.
I don't believe he did. The language was changed. I assume that was shared with all of you. If not, we can certainly get you a copy, because he said when we discussed it previously that he could not sign it, that he couldn't guarantee his caucus would not, and they have the right to, once they're in special session, to make their own decisions. So he was very clear that he would oppose an amendment. He would vote against an amendment, which he did. But you know, members of his caucus wanted to make a statement for their dissatisfaction with the bill. They wanted to make one last attempt to restore some of the features that were dropped out that they thought were most important, and you know, it didn't forestall the conclusion of the session. So I think that he certainly acted honorably, and his caucus, given their frustrations with the final version of the bill, and you know, also acted within the scope of their authority.
Governor, you made a personal appeal to the Senate DFL caucus to support your bills, and particularly the environmental bill, and by all accounts, it only persuaded a handful of people. What's your, us working about an 8-hour run around yesterday as the Senate tried to find another way forward. What are your thoughts on the fact that you made this appeal and the Senate DFL, many of the metro legislators at least, didn't go along?
Well, they had very strong feelings in opposition to the bill. I understood that going in, and they felt honor bound to express that opposition by voting against the bill initially. I don't know how many hours it entailed, but they were in special session for 21 hours, authorized to be in special session for 21 hours, so they chose to utilize some of that time for this last attempt to sort of improve the bill, and I respect the right to do so. And you know, they concluded the session. All the bills were passed. They'll all be signed. The uncertainties and anxieties that people around the state feel will be eliminated, and so they did what they had the right to do, and they felt they needed to do under the circumstances.
There's been a lot of criticism of the process of the last month, about things happening behind closed doors to the extreme, and about exclusive rather than inclusive processes. Are you interested in any kind of process change
I'm interested in it. I don't think 3 hours sleep is a good foundation from which to make those. Try to make those decisions, but I think it's a very valid question. And there's a way in which the deadline for the end of the session forces compromises and agreements that wouldn't otherwise be made. I learned that when I was in Washington, where there's only one absolute deadline, the end of every 2 years, and more legislation or controversy gets resolved in the last couple weeks after the even year election than do all the time heretofore. So it serves that purpose. But I think this one bumped up against that deadline in ways that maybe were not totally foreseen, but they were definitely having to move very swiftly at the end, and there are always objections from people who want to be made aware, to believe they deserve to be aware of everything. I don't excuse it. I've seen it before. I remember Bill Dietrich, the trade officer, cut off his ring finger. If you like more details, but because the garbage bill was discovered the next Saturday afternoon to have more garbage than anybody realized, and he was woodworking at home, thought his budget was secured, and they heard on the WCCO radio, no offense to anybody, but he had that they'd thrown the bill back to the conferees, and he was so distracted that he cut his ring finger off. So I have seen bloodier conclusions to sessions. It's not to excuse it, not to say it's a good thing, but it's partly the nature of the process which does serve it, and others that we can learn from.
Follow up on that, you said for the last couple of months that how do you follow up on that? You said for the last couple of months that Minnesota chose divided government. This is a theme that you've been trying to talk about around the state, and that the legislature, now you're saying the legislature ended it the same way. Would you tell us a little bit more why you think that means it has to be turbulent, it has to be chaotic?
Well, you have people coming from, with very strong and sincere convictions on exactly the opposite side of various issues, or taxation levels and spending priorities and the like, and then they come in having been elected, believing that their constituents support those views, the majority of their constituents, and that and they're in the majority caucus in particular, the majority of voters in Minnesota support those views, and they're not going to give them up easily, and that's the nature of the process. We've had, and that's in part the intention of our process, to have the clash of ideas and ideologies and geography and all sorts of life experiences, that through that grinding process and through that political combat, verbal combat, has been shown again and again to produce the best results for citizens. Not every time, but overall, and certainly better. As Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst of all forms of government except for all the rest. And in contrast with dictators or despots and whatever, it's the best system yet devised. So I respect it, even if I recognize the difficulties, and in this case extreme difficulties we face trying to reconcile views really the two different ends of the political spectrum.
So this is not a pitch for single-party government here in this.
I mean, we didn't go out to make divided government look bad. It just happened on its own. But it's I mean, the session where we both House and Senate were in both Republican control the first 2 years and DFL control the next 2 years were contentious even within those caucuses, but they produced more timely results, except for my unwillingness to go along with the Republicans in 11 and 12. But within the legislative process, there was much more cohesion and much more agreement, and each side advanced the ball farther in the direction that they thought was best for Minnesota. So it just is. I mean, people can make their own judgment whether it's better government or worse government, and it probably depends in part on whether your side is in the majority or the other side is the majority, in terms of whether you think this is progress or going backwards. But it is what it is. I respect the right of voters to decide who they want their leaders to be and what political balance they want to construct, and it's our job as those elected to work under that general direction to the best of our ability, and that's what happens.
Follow up on that. Do you happen to see the letter
Yeah, that was great.
Any plans to implement those stop tests to,
Yeah, I'm actually going to, take a note of that, please. I'm going to call that a very enlightened second grader. Yeah, that was, but I think it was well said. And we're all, we're passionate about our views, and, I can be as critical of people who disagree with me as I'm sure they are of me. So a little second grade perspective is good for all of us.
Governor, this week you said you've won some, you've lost some of this last session. Now that it's almost over, what's your assessment of the session as a whole? Success, failure?
Well, some of that's subjective. It depends on whether you view, some of the measures, say, in the Environment Bill as being advances or regressions. And that's, again, the subjectivity and difference of views is part of what makes it hard to really evaluate it. My view, the result was very mixed. And, there were things that I accomplished, the buffer language and the influenza, the bipartisan response on influenza that I think were ones that I'm proud of, and I think, are going to definitely benefit the state. And there were some decisions made that were imposed by the House Republican majority that I think are steering Minnesota in the wrong direction, and I'm sure they feel that way about some of the things that I fought for and accomplished. So, we don't have a consensus in Minnesota, and there have been other times in our history where we haven't. But we're dealing with some very complex problems, and there's a lot of. It's impossible to tell people if we do this, it's going to turn out better, or if we don't do this, it's going to turn out worse. It's just there are very different views about the appropriate levels of taxation and public expenditures, about the social policies that they should be trying to encourage or oppose. And transportation being an example where we all agreed at the outset, and I think sincerely we wanted better transportation. We wanted to improve our quality of our transportation system, and we couldn't agree on the means of raising revenues to accomplish that. So these are, it's not for lack of goodwill, it's for lack of agreement on how best to proceed, and we're going to have to work our way through that.
You mentioned on the citizen board thing, you hope to come back in 2017 to fix that. Building up your talk of divided government, you mentioned transportation just now. How much do you think can be accomplished in next year's session with this same makeup of the legislature? And how much do you think needs to wait until 2017 when voters have had another say, and I guess you're hoping the DFL gets control of it?
Well, I would make no bones about that. I'm going to campaign for DFLers in fall of next year, and in my mind, the state proceeded in a much better direction, and we accomplished a lot more as the legislature myself in the 2 years where we had DFL majorities in both houses, and I'm a DFLer. But next year I'm going to try to accomplish as much as possible, but I'm also realistic about. I don't expect that the basic divide that we experienced this year is going to change very, very much, but we'll see if we can find areas like avian influenza and others where we can work together.
Governor, will you campaign against fellow Democrats who grandstanded as you described?
No. I mean, that was. If I look back, that would be a word I would change because I don't think they did. I think they reflected their sincere convictions and their frustrations with the way the bill had been presented to them, and I regret the use of that word. Well, I'll push for it. I don't think it can wait. I didn't think it could wait this year, but I'm mindful, again, of the difficulties. It's not that we shouldn't do something. I think pretty much everybody agreed by early in the session we needed to make significant investments. So the question was how to pay for them.
Anything else?
What's it going to take for a more cohesive process moving forward?
Well, I've been doing this long enough to understand that human beings have very different views. As I said, the nature of the process is designed and intended by the founders to have clashes of ideas and ideologies and personalities, temperaments, and all the like. So, I mean, it's somebody called it the noise of democracy. Now, sometimes that noise is more harmonious than at other times, and this was one I'd say was less harmonious than not. But it reflects the deep divides among the voters, among the people of this state. There's not a consensus on how to proceed, and people have very different views of whether we need more or less government, more or less revenues, whether it should be going to advance the social policy or whether we should be going to oppose it. I mean, we're a microcosm of the complexion of the state of Minnesota in terms of the voters, the people, and their differences. So, you know, I mean, in my political career, the time I saw people of this country most united and most locking arm in arm together was right after 9/11. And it took a catastrophe of that magnitude to remind everybody we're all on the same team, we're all on the same side. We share the loathing for what was done to our country and to our citizens. And President Bush that January, the State of State said, you know, you got referenced some of the things that were going badly in this country right then, the economy and all others, but he said the state of our union has never been stronger. And he got a standing ovation from everybody in the chamber for that statement. So, you know, when things are left as unclear in terms of where things need to go and what the proper remedy is, it's much more contentious and much more difficult to define and then to decide.
You sketched out a plan for the interim, things you want to do, things you want to talk about.
I've assigned that to the lieutenant governor and my staff. I haven't thought of beyond. I will surely do that. Well, I'll go back to what was left undone this time, but I'll look and see what, you know, in light of, you know, changing circumstances. But I haven't had a chance to think beyond the conclusion of this session, reaching that conclusion, which is I've been focused on, especially the last few weeks.
Do you have a message to Minnesotans now that the session's over?
Be grateful that it's concluded in a way that was not destructive to the lives of some 10,000 public employees who didn't deserve to be laid off and losing their incomes. Again, people worked hard. They clashed. But again, that's to say that what occurred here was not what everybody or maybe anybody would wish for. But this is the way the democracy is supposed to work. You know, it's supposed to bring people together with very strongly, with their own strong opinions, their views. And I'm not excusing that dynamic, but I'm just saying it was intended by those who constructed this country. You got two branches of the legislature. You know, they've got two parties within, sometimes more parties within. You've got the tension and friction between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and all that it's all intended to overlap one another so no one gets their way. That, to me, is one of the geniuses of democracy. Nobody gets their own way. And nobody has all the answers, even though sometimes we think we do. And it's proven again and again it's best served this country and people who have had a chance to benefit from it around the world. So it's not to excuse the frustrations that we all feel. Those of us who are certainly here around the clock feel those frustrations and those disappointments and everything more acutely than anybody else. But it was designed this way, and it serves a purpose. And the alternative is usually one person who's got the power, has all the military support behind him or her, and makes the decisions, and who's somebody's interests, usually their own. And history has proven that doesn't better serve everyone else. I got to go. I have to join the. What?
Did you stay up all night watching the end of the session, or did you wake up this morning and find out?
I went to sleep probably around 1:30 was our last phone call. Took a little while after that. I don't get the TV part of it, you know, in the residence, which is, you know, has pluses and minuses. But then I got this morning to finish my remarks here. But you know, that's what we do, and I want to compliment my staff and Lieutenant Governor. I mean, they just work extraordinary. I'm just so fortunate to have really just phenomenal people, and they put in many more hours than I, and we're up probably most of them. Probably all night, as most of you were, I assume. So, you know, that kind of dedication to this process serves everybody well. Thank you.